Normal. Part of the trouble is the things considered normal. Arundhati Roy, in that excellent piece we heard as our reading, says, "We don't want to go back to normal." She says this pandemic is a portal through which we can move, not back to normal, but forward into a new way of being. And this got me thinking, if normal is not what we want, what do we want instead? Later at the end of the month, I will offer a companion sermon, Rowing Toward Home, on the topic of how this pandemic will leave a lasting impact on how we Unitarian Universalists worship and gather in community. For today, I focus on how this impacts our nation. Today, let us consider this pandemic portal and where it might lead for us as citizens of our country. Back to normal or on towards something new. Brené Brown has recently said, "We will not go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal, other than that we normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack." Brené Brown goes on to say, "We should not long to return, my friends. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature." What Brené Brown is saying is much the same that Arundhati Roy was talking about in her article. Roy described the many ways in which the pandemic and the Indian government's response to the pandemic have revealed glaring inequities and tragic consequences of prejudice. At the time she wrote her piece, shortly into the month of April, Arundhati Roy cited that the number of COVID-19 cases worldwide crept over 1 million. More than 50,000 people have died already, she said. Today, 5 weeks later, those numbers are still climbing globally. We've gone from 1 million to 4 million confirmed cases worldwide in those 5 weeks. From more than 50,000 dead to more than 275,000 dead worldwide. Roy, as I have said, was writing about her own country of India, but we in the United States are superlative, as always. We have 1.3 million of those 4 million cases right here in our country. And we've had nearly 80,000 deaths so far. This is hitting us hard. And we're not done. And that's just the virus. This is a pandemic crisis as well as a political crisis and an economic crisis and a healthcare crisis. Arundhati Roy talked about how the caste system in India has amplified the health problem, the pandemic problem. In our country, we have a similar impact. Poor people and minorities are disproportionately hit harder by this pandemic because of the way our society is structured and the way our government has responded. If this pandemic is to become the portal we need it to be, we must approach this with an active hope toward the world we long to create. Right now may be a pivotal moment in what some are calling the Great Turning. In the environmental movement, people talk about the Great Turning. Joanna Macy's elegant articulation about choosing a middle way between blindly ignoring and denying the problem versus getting stuck in feelings of despair and powerlessness. That middle way is to see the world at a turning. It calls us into active hope. I see this pandemic bringing these similar responses from people around me: active denial, active despair, and active hope. The great turning is not something that might happen to us. It's a choice we can make together about how we will respond. For Joanna Macy, the climate crisis is not about saving the planet or saving humanity. The active hope is found in the great turning, that is found in the great turning, is not about a promise of a particular outcome. It is instead about facing the reality we are in now and responding in our best way. We can't avoid the COVID-19 crisis. It's already here. We're living in it. And Joanna Macy will tell you the same thing about the climate crisis. We're already in it. The big question is not how can we avoid a disruption, but how will we navigate it? How can we steer our way as everything crashes around us, right? The pandemic crisis reveals these other crises. As a country, we are in the balance of either drifting politically into a full-on oligarchy with shades of fascism and plutocracy, or perhaps a recommitment to a democratic republic with greater ecological and economical and social balance. Something will come from all this. We should take part in determining what. Something different will rise in our society from this pandemic. With the healthcare atrocities continuing to unfold around us in the form of shortages and profiteering, we can perhaps push more strongly now for a single payer option, to pull for-profit healthcare from the equation if possible. With the record level unemployment we are experiencing, even as the Dow Jones rebounds, we can perhaps push the conversation of minimum income, or at least a real living wage level for the minimum wage. I'm not suggesting anything all that radical, just things that are civil and, dare I suggest, functional for a healthy society. The goal is not to be reactionary. I'm not suggesting that we react in panic to swing the pendulum as far to the other side as possible. No, our goal is instead to be intentional. It is to view what is happening through the lens of our values and connections, and then lift up what we know and point toward the future we want to create together. Look toward the systemic changes that are needed. We will get to the other side of this pandemic. Will we drag our old baggage along? Or perhaps in looking at things we've done to get through this, we can choose to continue some of them on the other side of this, such as caring about the vulnerable among us, such as valuing health workers and teachers more, such as prizing flexibility in a workforce rather than blind obedience. Perhaps the tools that have seen us through this are the tools we want more permanently in place as we emerge. In her book, Emergent Strategy, Adrienne Marie Brown says change is constant. So we're in the midst of an obvious change. Let's lean into it rather than fight for a return to normal. Adrienne Marie Brown offers an outline in her book, Strategies for Navigating Change. Her guiding principle is to recognize that change is constant. She also says, never a failure, always a lesson. Move at the speed of trust. And what you pay attention to grows. Her list is actually a little longer than that, but I just wanted to get a flavor for her elements of emergent strategy. We can uh, we can be strategic through the change, noticing what emerges and how we can nurture the parts we want most. Adrienne Marie Brown talks about change as not only constant, but also uh, fractal and iterative, interdependent and intentional. I mean, the thrust of her message and the point I'm attempting to raise here is this: we have a part to play in how this all unfolds. Something is emerging in this time of difficulty, and we can nurture it along in our own personal lives, in our circles and communities, and we can call for it as our nation winds its way through this trouble. Arundhati Roy said, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different, she said. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. She reminded us that we don't have to trip along and come gasping out of this pandemic, crying out for a return to income inequality, a return to hyper-polarized politics, a return to prejudice and hate, a return to fetishizing our police officers while devaluing our teachers, or a return to the sick way we have commodified health. We don't need to simply stand in the doorway wondering what comes next. We can instead choose to rise up and walk through this portal with a plan. We can instead choose to cross this tragic threshold with an eye toward the world we intend to create. We can, together, make of this pandemic a portal toward the more just and fair society that is emerging among us even now, in a world without end. May it be so.